everyone, and thanks to Joe and Mark for joining us this morning to share their stories of their adventures. I'm looking forward to this very much.
Good morning, everybody.
Okay.
We're Joe and Mark Hardman. A few years ago, we decided to explore the Outer Hebrides. The idea was to cycle from Castle Bay in the south up to Stornoway in the north. To make it more interesting, we used recumbent bicycles and we wild camped. But owing to work and family commitments, we didn't have enough time to reach Stornoway, so we only got about 3/4 of the way. But we did enjoy the journey.
I'm sure that most of you are aware that the Outer Hebrides are a chain of islands on the northwest coast of Scotland. Their exposed position in the Atlantic can make the weather very interesting. From the western side, the nearest windbreak is America. So storms are fairly frequent and lives have been lost as a result. The islands are also very beautiful. You can see on the map that Barra is at the bottom of the chain, along with nearby Battersea, which is joined by a causeway. Not all the islands are inhabited. At the top is Lewis, which is actually on the same landmass as Harris. I made the first trip solo, and my intention was to cycle the whole length of the chain. We've since realised that this is not really doable in a week if you want to enjoy all that the island has to offer. There's a lot to see, and the pace of life is very enjoyably slow. The unpredictable weather can force plans to be changed at any time, and as it happened, this first trip was cut much shorter. So this is the picture that I took as I was just arriving at Castle Bay, which is the main town on Barra. You can see it's not much of a town, but that's the main place on Barra. There's villages dotted around the island, but they often only consist of 2 or 3 crofts. The mountain behind the town is Hebrides. In a prominent position on the mountain is a statue of the Virgin Mary, one of many on the island. The journey to get the ferry had been very eventful. There had been numerous things happened on the way, but most notably, the timetables for the ferry include the time that you should catch the train from Glasgow if you're not driving. I followed this advice. Unfortunately, it was only really relevant for foot passengers, not cyclists. I arrived at the ferry terminal to be told that I could not board the ferry because the vehicle deck was closed, so I couldn't take my bike. After some negotiation, it was agreed that a member of staff would carry my bike, which was loaded for touring, up onto the passenger deck and find somewhere to put it. Somebody would also carry it off at the other end. The ferry arrived in Castle Bay quite late, so once off the ferry I needed to find a suitable place to pitch my tent quite quickly before it got dark. I ended up pitching it in the dark, in what I knew was not a very suitable spot. In this picture it looks like either my tent's a very odd shape or I've pitched it very badly. In fact, it's just the shape it's been blown into by a Hebridean gale. One end's caved in and the other end's blown out. In the morning, I discovered that I'd pitched in between 2 streams running down from the mountain, both just 2 or 3 feet away from the sides of the tent. Fortunately, my tent's pretty indestructible, and neither the gale nor the proximity of running water had disturbed my sleep. The real problem for the trip was just a few miles down the road. To reach this point, I had travelled entirely on an uphill or flat road, with not much need for brakes. Now I was to head for the ferry, which is inevitably downhill. Remember the bike being carried on and off the ferry? When I braked on a sharp hill, there was a loud bang. The tyre and inner tube each had a gash about 3 inches long and the wheel rim was damaged. The brake had been knocked out of line during its ferry adventures and I hadn't noticed. I should have checked it and I didn't. I'm now in the middle of nowhere with a bike that I can't ride or mend. I had a spare inner tube but no tyre or wheel. I took the wheel off in the hope of a flash of inspiration, which didn't happen. There's no phone reception, so I can't seek help from anybody. And then a car comes and stops. The driver's on her way to work and can drop me off at the bike shop just outside Castle Bay. This is the bike shop. Probably doesn't look like any bike shop that anybody's used to seeing. Well, it was a bike shop. But there was a sign on the door saying really useful when there's no phone reception. The lady said she would take me to work with her and see what they could sort out there. She was a teacher at the island school. There's just one school on the island. This is the school. I walked straight in with her. Island life is very different, and there was no suggestion of concern about a stranger going into the school. I was taken to the head's office and given tea and biscuits, while the head made numerous phone calls on my behalf. It turned out that the owner of the bike shop was working on the Calmac ferries for a few weeks. I was to discover later that everybody does several jobs. Pretty much nobody has a single job that they go to. And they usually often run in a croft as well at the same time. I was told a man called Neil had the key to the shop, and I was to leave the bike outside the shop and we would communicate via notes left on the bike. No worry of theft here. Each day I checked the notes and found he was unable to source a replacement for my non-standard wheel or even a tyre. One day I saw an ambulance. It stopped and the driver called out, "Are you Joe?" Turned out he was Neil. Lots of people I met around the island would ask me if I was the lady with the broken bike. My story had gone around the island. All my kit was on the bike and was difficult to carry in one go. The bike shop was, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a mile out of the main part of Castle Bay, but far enough to be difficult to carry your full load. So I booked myself into the Durnard hostel. There was only a bed available for 2 nights, but that gave me a bit of space to think what to do. It was a very friendly place, and it doesn't look much, but there were nice people there. There was a kayak centre attached to one side of it, part of the same business, and a couple of times during the week, I saw that the minibus they used to take people kayaking was not full, so I catched a lift for something to do to a different part of the island. When my time was up at the hostel, I needed to fetch my stuff and camped on the shore directly opposite the hostel and next to the ferry port. It was a beautiful spot, and on some nights there were other campers there. Those 2 young gulls, they followed me everywhere. I don't know why, I didn't feed them, but every time I was around the tent, they were following me around. And the smile you can see on my face here, I can assure you, was not a permanent feature of the week. Most of the time I was able to use the hostel facilities. It was literally just over the road. And I fetched water from there as well. There was also a toilet available in the village hall. On one of my visits there, I saw that they were selling tickets for a comedy performance there that night. I asked the young man if it would be better than spending the evening alone in a tent with howling wind and pouring rain outside. And he assured me that it would be better, so I purchased a ticket. The performance was quite entertaining, but mostly the people were very friendly. There was tea and biscuits in the interval, and everybody chatted to me, even though I was a complete stranger. It was a nice evening, and that night it was foul weather, and it was a lovely break from everything. While I was staying at the hostel, I met these 2 people, both staying there. Dennis is from Italy, and he was travelling alone. And Lena, who was from Austria, was also travelling alone, but she had a hire car. So she kindly took us out on a couple of car trips, which was a very welcome distraction. So between Lena and the minibus from the kayak centre, I did get out and about a bit. My trips in the kayaking minibus took us to the airport. This is the airport. It is the beach, just as it looks like. It really is straight on to the beach, which means that the times of flights are dependent on the tide. So they're not the same every day. And in this picture, people are collecting their luggage. They're driven onto the beach and they're collecting it straight from the plane. And I don't know whether it's usual, but on this occasion, it was the pilot of the plane. He got out and got all the cases from the luggage, and these people are collecting them. There is a luggage collection point. I haven't got a picture of it, unfortunately, but it's a tiny conveyor belt in a bush shelter kind of construction. I don't really know why it's got a conveyor belt. It doesn't need one. They could just put them in there. But that's the aeroplane that you can arrive on, and that's the airport. I know Peter's landed there, so he could probably tell you more about that than me. This is right opposite the airport, literally just over the road. There are massive sand dunes. And in the dips, there's complete shelter from the wind. So on one of my trips, I sat there for quite some time in the sunshine reading. It was windy at the top, but in there I'd got perfect shelter. And as an added bonus, there's mobile reception there, so I could ring home. The airport also has an excellent cafe. It's not like the sort of cafes that would usually be in an airport. It's not some big chain selling overpriced stuff. It is a local run thing, and it's very good and was very welcome. On this one, just to show that the weather's not always awful, this is actually on a trip across the causeway to the very beautiful island of Vattersae. This was a trip I did with Lena and Dennis. We had lunch in the cafe, which was also a play school. Buildings here have to multitask as well as people. Just like most people do multiple things, most buildings have multiple uses. So I think they call it the community cafe. And then a short walk from there is a very narrow piece of land where you can walk from the beach on one side to the beach on the other in under 5 minutes. And the beaches are pure white sand and very beautiful. There's also some interesting rocks. These rocks are really, really pretty at the top of the beach. And I don't know whether I'm pronouncing this right, but to the best that I can do, it's Lewisian gneiss, spelled Gneiss. And it is apparently the oldest rock in Britain, and certainly very pretty. The other beautiful thing is the macaire. The inset picture here is one that I took. The other picture is actually one that I've stolen from Google because I wanted to show the extent of it, which I didn't have a picture of. Now I'm going to hand over to Mark to tell you about the macaire because he knows more about it than I do.
Right. This slide is really all about the geology of the islands. As Joe said, the underlying rocks are hard rock called gneiss. This forms a chain of hills and small mountains on the east side. The west side used to be covered in peat bog, but thousands of years ago, the early farmers fertilized their land with seaweed, and the westerly gales blew in seashells and sand onto the peat. And this has formed a kind of grassland called the macaire, which in spring and summer, as you see, is full of flowers. This black-haired grassland is very vulnerable to sea level rise. Also, it can only be used really for growing hay and grazing animals, because if it's ploughed, it's a very light soil and it tends to blow away in the high winds. Okay, do you want to carry on?
Yeah. Okay. This was another day of finding something to explore while I was stranded. This small boat goes out from Castle Bay Harbour to Kisimul Castle, which is just offshore. It's literally a couple of minutes ride in the boat to get to the castle. The castle is the only surviving medieval castle in the Western Isles. Its position in the sea is quite spectacular. It's the thing, as you're approaching on the ferry to Castle Bay, you see this very imposing looking castle in front of the island before you. It's the seat of the chief of Clan MacNeil. It's well worth the visit, with lots of interest here and fantastic views back to Castle Bay and Hebrides. You can see that it's very close here. And I particularly like the view of the island through the window. Now, the next picture is a rubbish picture, and for a reason. These phone boxes were, for the most part, my only way to contact Mark. Occasionally, I managed to find a bit of phone reception or internet access, but not often. And I needed to keep in touch, as he was doing everything he could to source the parts I needed and get them sent to Castle Bay. Ultimately, this could not happen because delivery to the Isles is a lengthy process, and I was only there for a week. The reason for the poor picture is that on this occasion, the wind was blowing so hard that I couldn't stand still, let alone hold the camera steady. And it was also pouring with rain. This was the night that I went to the performance at the village hall. The time for my return ferry came with my bike still outside the bike shop with its broken wheel off. Neil had tried really hard but could not source the parts in the time available. The only real hope had been to find what was needed somewhere on the islands, which had proved impossible. I had to put the wheel back, pack my kit back on the bike, and carefully wheel it onto the ferry. From the other end of the ferry, I would have a journey of many hours, many bike changes, including having to get across Glasgow to a different station, all with a bike that could only be wheeled very carefully, and it was a daunting prospect. On arrival in Oban, I had a look round for a bike shop. This little one was very nearby. So I asked them what they could do, given that I didn't have time for them to order anything. They didn't have a suitable wheel, but they did have a tyre that nearly fitted. It was too wide, but it could be used as an emergency. I can't remember what they did to the wheel, but they did something as a get me home job. It would do no more than a short distance, but at least I could get on and off the trains and even cycle short distances where necessary. And I was very relieved. So my first trip was definitely an adventure, but I had barely travelled more than 10 miles from the start. One more picture, isn't there, on this one? And this is the new wheel that still proved difficult to source at home, and Mark will tell you more.
I tried to buy a new wheel for the bike, but it proved impossible because Joe's bike has got a very wide axle. So what I had to do is get onto eBay, and I sourced a rim somewhere in Germany, so I ordered that. That came, and then I had to get my local bike shop to build a new wheel. By the time it was built, Joe was already home. So it didn't really help. The following year, we decided to go together to try again to get to Stornoway. We went around the end of April, early May time. The reason for this is that if you go in this period, you get good weather and long days, but you avoid the midges, of which the area is famous. So we drove up to Oban. It's much easier than the train, particularly with 2 bikes. And there is a car park in Oban where you can leave your car for the whole week, and they don't charge. So we got the ferry over to Castle Bay. The fare is only £27 each return, which I thought was really good value. It's subsidised by the government because they want to keep the people on the island well connected to the mainland. So on our first day, we cycled round Barrow on the western side, and we came down to this ferry, which is taking us over to Eriskay, which is the next island. This is us coming off of Eriskay, off of the ferry rather, onto Eriskay. Eriskay is only a small island, about 2 miles across. It's not got much of interest, apart from being hilly. The only thing worthy of note is that there is a beautiful beach here called Prince Charles's Beach, and it's where Bonnie Prince Charlie landed in 1745 to start his rebellion.
And here we have another trip, another bike problem. Shortly after leaving the Eriskay ferry, completely out of the blue, my gear change fell apart in my hand, as it does. I was left with very limited gears for the rest of the day, with some hills involved. We spent that night at the Gatliff Trust Hostel in Howmore in South Uist, which you will hear more about later. The hostel was looked after by a lady named Betty. She lived on a croft at the bottom of the hill, along with her husband, Tommy. Tommy has many different roles, and one of them is running a cycle hire and repair service. So we took the bike to him, and he fixed it using a gear change from another bike. The gear change was already old and wasn't the same as the one on the other side on my bike. It was meant to be just a short-term emergency repair, but in fact, I didn't change it for years.
This is a small shrine that we passed. I think this one was on Eriskay. There's quite a few of these on the islands. The islands have a very sharp religious divide. The southern islands of North and South Uist and Barrow are strongly Catholic. As soon as you get up into North Uist, it changes to Presbyterian. This is our first picture on South Uist. We've just come off of the causeway, and we're trying to find the right route to Howmore village. This shot was taken at the same place, but it's looking the other way. It's looking back towards Eriskay, and you can see the causeway between Eriskay and South Uist. Nowadays, almost all of the islands are linked with causeways. They were built by the EU in the 1990s. There's still 1 or 2 ferries left. The ferries are actually free if you pay to come over to the islands. It's all part of the fare. A few miles further on, I came across this building. I thought first of all it could be a cement factory, but if you have a look, you can see there's a cross on it. So actually it's a church, and it's a Catholic church called Our Lady of Sorrows. I think it doesn't fit into the landscape at all, and to me it's a very ugly building. And apparently, if you search for ugly building South Uist on the internet, this picture comes up. This was when we've just arrived in Howmore, so we've now travelled about 28 miles from the start of the day at Castle Bay. This is a typical croft, although this one you can see has been modernised up to modern standards, with double glazing in particular. If you notice the roof, it's thatched. It's also got a row of heavy stones all the way around the edge, which is to hold the thatch down in case of Hebridean gales. This is a picture of Howmore village. As you can see, it's a mixture. The hostel we stayed at is the building in the middle. If you look carefully, you can see that the thatch has been taken off. We'll explain why in a minute. The building on the left side is a Presbyterian church, and this was the only Protestant church we found in the south of the island. You can see there's quite a lot of ruined buildings, and one of the problems they have there is depopulation. So it's quite common to come across crofts which are falling down. As soon as we arrived, we met some other travellers, and they invited us out for a walk along the beach. So this picture is taken at Howmore Beach, about a mile from the hostel. It looks pretty, but I remember it as being very cold. This is a picture of Joe taken inside the hostel. The hostel is quite small, probably about 10 beds, very cosy. You can see there's a wood burning stove there, so it was nice and warm. It only cost us £6 per night, which I thought was very good, and it gives you everything you need, plus plenty of company, which is nice, isn't it? Mm. So this is a picture of the outside of the hostel, taken the following morning, I think, as we were about to leave. As you can see, all the roof is off, and it's about to be rethatched. The warden of the hostel was waiting for the thatcher and the lorry full of straw to arrive. This is a little bit out of sequence. This is another one of the shrines that we passed. The words on it are in Gaelic, and it says, what does it say? It says, "You are very welcome," in Gaelic. So from Howmore, we carried on travelling north through South Uist, and then over a small island called Benbecula. Benbecula is not very exciting, but it does have what is the nearest thing to a town on the island, because it's got a RAF base, and so it's got modern housing for the servicemen, and it's got shops. This is taken just after Benbecula, when we were about to go onto the next causeway, which you can see in the distance. I think this was taken for a tea break, probably.
Yeah. We like tea breaks.
Yeah. So after Benbecula, the next big island we arrive at is called North Uist. As you go on to North Uist, you come across this interesting sign, Fis na Fala, Ditch of Blood. This sign commemorates an ancient battle fought in 1601 between two of the tribes. In those days, the armies were very small. One army had 38 men, and the other army had 15 men. The 38 men were busy feasting in the church when they were attacked by the other army, who managed to kill all of them but 2. It's also famous because it was the last battle in the British Isles fought with bows and arrows. And that was 1601.
Is it a good point for a break here, Mark?
I think it probably is, yes.
Great, it's fantastic.
Oh,
you mentioned the airport. It's a wonderful airport. The only one in the whole world with scheduled flights, I understand. The only beach airport with scheduled flights anywhere in the world.
Yeah, and I wondered if that was dependent on the tide. Does the tide actually cover the...
It does,
yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, each day the flights are at different times because they have to fit in with the tide.
Right.
And they have like small windsock things with signs to say when the windsocks are out, you can't go on the beach. If the windsocks are taken down, then it's okay. There's not a plane coming in, and you can use the beach.
Okay.
Wonderful.
Brilliant.
Okay.
Anyway, that was great. And it's a bit frustrating for you that you had all those problems with the bike the first time there, Joe.
Yes.
It is, but it makes the story.
Go around
Well
it. They
done.
go around it.
Well done for persevering and going back. So, okay, we look forward to the next half. Yeah.
So this
Over to you then, Joe and Mark.
Thank you. This is a picture taken on North Uist. As you can see, the landscape is very different from South Uist. North Uist is covered with peat bogs and small lochs, so it's not very fertile, and population is quite low. This is a picture of Joe paddling. It shows that actually some of the time it can get quite warm on the Hebrides. This was taken at the end of the day after we'd cycled about 48 miles, I think it was, that day.
Yeah, it was quite a hot day on that day as well, certainly by Hebridean standards.
So after 48 miles, we arrived on the Bernay. This is another of the Catholic Trust hostels, the Bernay hostel. That day, it was warm, and we got here and just flaked out the chaps that we met. He's cycling with that dog all the way around the islands, and monkey dog. The Bernay Hostel is two old crofts joined together. This is one of them, and it's actually on the beach, so you get magnificent views from the kitchen window right across the sea to the island. So this is, as you can see, is our penthouse suite. It's a very basic hostel, but that's all you need. When you spend a whole day cycling with a heavy touring bike, all you want is a comfortable bed and a bit of warmth. So the following day, we decided that we hadn't got enough time to carry on to Harris and Lewis. So we had to turn around and start coming back towards the ferry. So we cycled off of Bernay, back on to North Uist, and then we turned west. We turned right so that we were going down the west side of North Uist. One of the things we found was this very posh bus shelter. It's even got a hostel there. So
the reason that it's a hostel is because this is in the village of Solas, but the next village where the bus would be going is
the co-op store on the Hebrides. Every island has its own co-op, and it seems to be that all of the food is distributed by the co-op. We passed this little croft on North Uist. This is about as far from civilization as you can get, and this was a working croft, so it had animals as well. It's pretty, but I'm not sure that I want to live there. So on the day coming back to North Uist, it was windy, but also out of the wind, it was quite hot. So this is me sunbathing. This was actually in a dip in the sand dunes. So the wind went over the top, and it was quite hot. But you can see it's not hot enough for me to take any clothes off. It's not that hot. Do you want to do this?
Yeah. This is one of my favourite stories, so Mark's letting me tell it in the middle of his section. Cycling down North Uist, we really needed to find a camp spot before coming to the end of the island, because it was getting quite late afternoon, and if we reached the end of North Uist, we would then have to go across Benbecula, which isn't great for camping, and onto South Uist, which will be too far. So we needed to stop. But we saw this spot, which looked ideal, and we stopped and pitched up. After we'd pitched, I had a thought about the nearby house, which you can't see on the picture, but it's quite close. Wild camping is allowed in Scotland, with a few exceptions, providing you are a reasonable distance from houses. I wasn't sure that we were a reasonable distance, so I hoped we wouldn't be seen. But within a very short time, there was a woman looking over the wall. She caught my eye and beckoned me over. Reluctantly, I went, expecting to be told to move. She said, "Do you see that gate there?" pointing along her stone wall. I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, if you go in that gate and walk along the path, at the end you'll find a tap, so you can fill up your water bottles." I thanked her, and then she said, "And in the morning, come round to the front door and knock, and you can use my shower." I was amazed. In the morning, we went on with wash kit and our pack towels. She told us not to be silly. We were to use her towels and handed us both big fluffy towels. She thought we wouldn't be able to get our towels dry. We told them we would dry them on the back of our bikes, as we usually do, but she wasn't having any of it. We visited a little local shop after our showers where we bought her a card and asked her name so we could send it to her. She told us she did this regularly for wild campers. She was a lovely lady. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Mark wanted to say something else on that one.
So if you have a look at our tent is a Bangle Force 10, which is an A-frame design, and it's very strong. So it's ideal for windy conditions. The only problem was it actually weighs 5 kilograms, which is pretty heavy for a hike tent. But when you go cycle camping, 5 kilograms on the bike is not that bad. Not really. Very close to us, there was a sign on the road saying "Beware of otters." Unfortunately, we didn't see any. This is a picture taken from the same place, looking in a different direction. Oh, and it's looking over North Uist towards Benbecula. I don't think that there's anything there to see, is there really? No. So we went back over Benbecula, and this is just as you come onto South Uist. It's a very large statue called Our Lady of the Isles, and basically it's proclaiming that this is a Catholic island. It is quite big and brash, but I think it fits into the countryside quite nicely, and I was quite fond of it. You can see it from many miles away. Well, can you go back? Yeah, I know, but it doesn't respond. It doesn't. So, this picture was taken coming on to South Uist, and you can see South Uist is not all Macaire grasslands. This is taken looking to the east side, and it's some of the mountains to the east. They look quite high, but actually they're not particularly high at all. Probably about 600 feet. So that day we arrived back at the Palmore Hostel. The thatcher had just arrived with a large lorry. As you see, he's had to come all the way from Oakhampton in Devon. You can see it on the lorry. So he was going to stay for 6 weeks to thatch both of the crofts. The thatcher actually came from Norfolk, and it was being thatched with Norfolk reed, not the local stuff. So this is us, probably the following morning, I think, when we're just about to cycle down to the ferry. Because we were running out of time, we didn't cycle all the way back to Barra. There is a ferry about 13 miles from Howmore at a place called Loch Boysdale. So we're there. This is us coming to Loch Boysdale ferry, which unfortunately is the end of that adventure.
But there's another one to come, so don't go away.
Okay, do you want to? Yeah.
Okay, so we're now on to trip number 3. And here we are back at Howmore Hostel. We came into Lochboysdale for this trip. Notice the roof. It's now thatched. The thatcher we met the year before has done a really good job and the building looks transformed. The wind, there is no escaping it. This picture is in Carinish, North Uist. The sign refers to Temple Trianid, which I've almost certainly pronounced wrong, which means Trinity Temple. It's a Norse temple and seminary. It's considered by some to be the oldest university in Scotland and dates back to the 12th or 13th century. Sorry about the sound of our cat whining. And here we are back at Berneray. We love these very simple Gatliff Trust hostels in old traditional buildings. The Trust run 3 hostels on the islands. We haven't been to the 3rd one. In partnership with the islanders. They're always looked after by local people. This boat is taking us further than we've been before, to Leverburgh on the island of Harris. Leverburgh is so named because William Lever, first Count Leverhulme, took a boat trip when he was in his 30s and fell in love with the Western Isles. In 1918, in his 60s, he bought the Isle of Lewis, as you do, for £167,000, believing that he could resurrect the shipping industry. I think that should say fishing industry. His plan didn't work out because returning servicemen occupied plots of land there at the end of the war. William considered them to be squatters, but the law decided in favour of the servicemen, so William's plans were sunk. He then bought the South Harris estate for £36,000 with the same plan. Some big development took place in a village called Obber. This was later renamed Leverburgh. The industry was successful until William's death in 1924. The company had formed no interest in the Harris part of their operations, and they sold it to a local family at a huge loss. But it's still known as Leverburgh and is now a much bigger place than it was before. This is one of the many beautiful beaches on the west coast of Harris and along the whole west coast of the islands. And here we've got one of the many rainbows on this trip. This 3rd trip was quite a wet and windy one, and there were many beautiful rainbows. Most days have seen a combination of sunshine and rain. Stopping for a tea break. We have lots of those. We like tea. Still on the west coast, and another beautiful beach can be seen here. And in the background is the uninhabited island of Taronsay. I think there may be a few guest cottages on there, but nobody actually lives there. And another tea break. I'm taking a tea break with rocks for shelter from the wind because Mark had got a puncture and was dealing with it up on the road. So I took my cup of tea down amongst the rocks to enjoy some sun and without the wind. And you can only just see Mark at the bottom of here, but that's where we were. It's very near to the Harris Golf Course, which must be the windiest golf course in the land. And this is Mark mending the puncture. So he got to mend a puncture, I got to have a cup of tea. And oh yes, the clouds, Mark's just reminding me. Notice how the clouds are gathering. Yes, very much so. At this point, we're now crossing the high hills that divide South Harris from North Harris, and we've moved away from the coast. And this is an area of peat cutting. Traditionally, this has been the main fuel of the islands for both cooking and heating. Some house purchases include rights to a certain peat bank. This might not be close to the house, but you are not allowed to cut peat anywhere else. Large stacks of cut and dried peats can often be seen near houses, because if your peat bank is a long way away, obviously you're going to cut quite a lot and bring them all home, and they have these big stacks outside the house. A bit of an unusual camp spot. This is a little green in the middle of the small town of Tarbert. Tarbert is the main town for the Isle of Harris. There were a couple of other tents on there, so we knew it was okay. People on the island, people camp all over the place. So there we are in what's essentially a town square, bit of greenery, and we're camped in the middle of it. Hang on a minute, let me finish. This was actually the end point for our journey, because we had now run out of time again, and we had no time to go further and needed to head for our ferry home from Lochboysdale in South Uist. And besides that, there was some serious weather closing in.
The only problem with camping in the middle of town was the nearest toilet was about 5 minutes walk away.
This is the very pretty harbour in Tarbert, and the ferry which was coming in from Uig on the Isle of Skye. We went to a local pub in Tarbert in the evening where there was live music. Music is a big part of the tradition of the island, and it's not dying out. Youngsters can be seen playing bagpipes and other traditional instruments. If you look at the accordion player in this picture, you can see that he's much younger than you might expect an accordion player to be. Because of the now stormy weather and time constraints, we inquired about taking the bikes on the bus the following morning. We knew that this was often possible. We were told we would have to wait until school was school-going home time, as that is when the full-size buses were used. For the rest of the day, only minibuses are in operation. That was fine for us, so we got a ride down the island, heading into the storm that would have been difficult for cycling. The bus journey was different to any we had been on before. The children collected from schools included the very youngest school children. They were accompanied to the bus by a teacher. The bus then took each child to their house, where the driver got off with them and took them to their door to hand them over to a parent. The driver didn't need to ask where each child lived, he knew them all. He also had various parcels and objects on board, which he put in various gardens and collected others for later delivery. It seems the buses are multi-purpose as well. We got off the bus in Leverborough and got to the ferry back to Berneray. And once again, we're at Berneray Hostel. The following morning, the weather was bad. It was very bad. We cycled down to the end of the island and stopped at a cafe that we knew was there to consider our options. The weather had become so bad that cycling was not really an option. It just wasn't possible. We needed to get to Lochboysdale, and there was no bus service from here. We had to get through North Uist, Benbecula, and most of South Uist, a journey of 51 miles. We had no phone reception, so asked the cafe proprietor if we could use his phone and if he could give us a taxi number. We needed a minibus taxi that could take the bikes. The nearest suitable taxi was based 40 miles away. He came with rear seats already removed, so there was no fuss getting the bikes in. The journey to Lochboysdale was smooth and trouble-free. It cost us £70, which sounded a lot, but this taxi had travelled 40 miles to pick us up. It was a minibus, but with only 2 passengers. It did 51 miles with us on board, then travelled back to base. Not to mention the care the company had taken to send the right vehicle already prepared for our needs. A quick calculation told us that this journey was much cheaper per mile than getting a bus into town from our home in Ayleston. And that was, I forgot to switch the slide forward, that's the cafe where we sat and made the phone calls. That again is not our picture. And neither is this one, but that's just to say back on the ferry to Oban, and Lewis is still waiting for another trip one day.
What's about a lockdown, perhaps?
Yes, once lockdown's over, maybe we can go and explore the top end of the island that we've yet to see. 3 trips and we haven't reached Lewis.
And that's the end of our tale. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you very much indeed, Joe and Mark. Thank you. Could you, I mean, you obviously like it there in the Hebrides. Could you imagine living there, or would that not be your comfort zone?
No, visiting is different to living.
It's a bit isolated. Yeah. It takes a long time to get anywhere, and our family are scattered all over the country at the moment.
Right.
So we wouldn't see them very often.
So travelling takes a long while to get there. Yeah, that was great. That was, I mean, I've only ever been to Iona and a bit of Mull and Skye, but some of the photos were a little bit reminiscent. Yeah, I love the
yes, we've been to Mull and Iona. I love those as well.
So yes, it's fabulous. So has anybody else? Someone has just said, what an adventure. Thank you very much.
Patricia?
Yeah?
Andrew here.
Andrew, hello Andrew.
Hi. It's really unsettled me because we just love it up there. And
do you?
Now we moved from Leicester, unfortunately, to Sussex.
Very long journey then.
We're impossibly far. But it does, I know all these places, and it makes me restless to go there.
What's that lockdown?
Yeah, at the moment we're going to Cornwall, which isn't that far comparatively to going up there. But people say, oh, it's so far to Cornwall. Well, compared with these places.
Oh yes, it's especially if you're going by public transport. It's a very long journey to get there.
Yeah.
But so beautiful when you do, and the culture is very different. I see somebody's asked, did we have a photo of the kind lady? I'm afraid we didn't.
No, we've normally gone with the camper van.
Yeah.
That's ideal.
Did you ever see? Sorry, someone speaking. No. Did you ever see the Call the Midwife programme with which was on the Hebrides? It was a Christmas edition, I think.
I didn't see that one. I usually watch it, but I missed that one. I haven't seen it.
It's worth Googling it. You must see it.
Right.
You must see it.
I'll do that today.
Yeah, you'll enjoy. You will enjoy it. Yeah. Anybody else want to share a comment or ask a question?
It's most interesting.
Thank you. Yeah, it was interesting. And it is lovely to see the sea, isn't it? It's lovely. I know Hannah's watching from New Zealand, so I hope you enjoyed that, Hannah. I know when Hannah was over from New Zealand a few years ago, we went to Skye together, and that was lovely.
Yes.
And I quite like the journey in a way, because whichever way you go, you feel like, you know, well, as long as you don't fly, of course, because then you have no concept of how far you're going, but it kind of, you know, it just makes it realistic. Ted and Jana, were you going to say something?
Yeah. I was just wondering actually whether what made you decide to use those types of bike rather than should I say the normal pedal cycle?
We both have recumbents. I ride mine all the time. I only very occasionally use an upright bike. Mark uses his when he doesn't. he alternates a lot more than I do. But they are very, very comfortable, and they're particularly good for touring because you've got a great view all around you. You're not sitting down looking at a triangle of road in the front of you. You're looking at the whole expanse. So the comfort and the views, they're perfect.
You find because they're fairly low to the ground, they shed the wind quite well. So in windy conditions, you have an advantage. The only problem with them really is they're not quite so good going uphill. These bikes have got 27 gears, and you need every gear you've got, don't you, to get up hills.
You do, but then I'm not good up hills either, so I need every gear I've got on any bike.
But the main advantage is that on a long journey, they're very comfortable, far more than an ordinary bike would be. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
So someone is saying, Eleanor and Frank, I rode 4 miles across the Sound of Harris like a mill pond because there was no wind for the sails.
That date must be on the calendar somewhere.
Yeah, I guess the weather is a bit of a disadvantage there, especially if you're on a bike.
It is.
I don't know. It's just, I mean,
but it's part of the character of the islands. It wouldn't be the same if that wasn't the case.
No, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I know you sort of hope each day that, you know, the weather's going to be kind to you and it's not going to howl too much, but even so, that is part of the character. And it's part of what's formed a lot of the islands as they are, and what's created the culture as it is. It's just all part of the Hebrides.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do the planes get cancelled quite often because of weather, or do they manage to fly?
Probably. Peter will be able to tell you that. He's flown on it. I haven't. Certainly the ferries, it's not unusual for the ferries to be cancelled.
Yeah.
Fortunately, we've never hit that problem, but it definitely happens.
Yeah.
I don't know, even though you mentioned my name there, Joe, I'm not quite sure. I suppose the aircraft on the beach is cancelled when it's bad weather. But amazingly, when you're on that aircraft, you look out of the window and down to the wheel, and the wheel is almost, you know, the tyre width deep in the sand, which feels quite strange. But it's got sort of a shell component, which makes it quite hardy. So it's quite an experience.
Hmm.
Can I ask a question? It's Viv.
Hi, Viv.
I'm very sorry, but I haven't managed to get the picture today, only the sound. I've no idea why. But so I haven't seen these bicycles that you're referring to. And could somebody describe them, please, and give them a name that I would understand?
They're called recumbents.
They're called what?
Recumbent.
Recumbent. Okay.
Yes. And the pedals are in front of you rather than underneath. So you're semi-laying back. The pedals are in front of you. In the case of our recumbents, the steering is under the seat, so you're actually sitting in quite a comfortable position with your arms down to steer. You do get recumbents that have over-seat steering.
Oh, right.
But ours are under-seat steering.
Uh-huh. I don't think I've ever seen one.
See the pictures.
But they're not very common.
No.
I think we're the only two in Leicester, probably.
Really? Gosh.
Yeah, perhaps you could post a picture on Facebook page, Pete. And also, Viv, I'm sorry you didn't have the picture, but you know, all our talks are recorded, so do remember that that you can watch them on the YouTube channel.
Right.
Leicester Travel Talks on YouTube. Yeah, all our talks are, well, with the permission of the speakers, obviously. They're going on this YouTube, and it's proving there's lots of people tuning in and watching, so do remember that.
Yes, thank you.
So if you're asking later, yes, you have our permission.
Thank you. And how are we doing? Yeah. Anyway, I just want to say before I'm not sure how many minutes we've got. Few, I think. I just want to say that this week, if you would like to make a donation this week to our speakers today, they are asking you to have a look at the Rainbow Trust Africa website. It's www.rainbowafrica.org, and you can read about them, and you can go onto their donate page if you'd like to. It's a charity that provides education for 500 children and support for destitute grannies and their orphan grandchildren in southern Zambia. So that sounds like a worthwhile cause. I just want to go back to the ferries, the Caledonian McBrain ferries. John and I, we love travelling on those. And I don't know whether John would share his little poem with you. Would you, John?
There used to be a saying that the earth is the Lord's and all it contains, but the Western Isles are them at brains.
We got a fabulous book about the ferries of Scotland and the Hebrides. Yeah.
I abandoned once I got there by train. I then taken an interest in the boats as the main form of public transport. But I certainly like rural bus rides, picking up parcels and delivering things. They've got a feel of their own.
Parcels, children, anything that you want sending somewhere, you just put it on the bus.
Yeah. Oh, it was a lovely story about the children being personally delivered. Yeah, very nice.
Yes.
I'm just going to put on the chat. I'll just put the name of that charity. So.
It was a great talk. Thank you both very much indeed. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
It was great. And yeah, thank you. I know it's quite a nerve-wracking experience.
Yes.
So, so thank you very much.